Okay, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of OP Radio. I'm your host, Mac. I have the best job in the world because I get to talk to a bunch of really smart and interesting people building things in and around the Optimism ecosystem. And we have just one such person with us today. Before I allow them to introduce themselves, though, I want to allow a colleague of mine, a fellow optimist, a colleague at OP Labs to say hello. Good morning, Zane. How are you?
Good morning, Mac. Great to be here and excited to chat with y'all. For those that I haven't met, my name is Zane. I'm the product manager at OP Labs.
Thank you for that, Zane. Super glad to have you. And so let's get right into it with our guest of honor, our featured nerd, Mr. Remco. Good morning, Remco.
Hello, good to be here.
We're super grateful to have you here with us, Remco. I think we're going to have a great conversation. Before we dig into who you are and your background, though, I got to ask, I don't know you very well, but on your Twitter bio, it says you are a bicycle maximalist. Can you explain what you mean by that?
It means I try to do as many things on my bike as I can. I mean, I'm Dutch. I grew up on a bicycle. I was born on a bicycle. And I love nothing more than taking my two daughters in a stroller behind the bike and biking through endless forests.
I absolutely love that. And I got to ask, you seem like someone who pays attention to the details. So what kind of bike are you working with?
Oh boy, I found a really interesting one. It's a young startup from New York that is making extreme low maintenance bikes, and they made one that is using a gearbox made by a couple of former Porsche engineers that scaled down a proper auto transmission to bike size. So no more derailless braking or chains getting loose. The thing doesn't even have a chain; it has a belt drive. Love it.
I absolutely love that. And, it kind of reminds me of technology because bikes are a piece of technology, right? And I think the more simple and elegant they can be, I just prefer that. Like I remember when I rode bikes, I had a fixed gear and I love the simplicity of it. There's just fewer things that could break.
Yeah, they're not good on hills though.
No, they're not good on hills. They're not good going downhill either.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I also love this saying. I believe it was Steve Jobs who at some point said that computers are bicycles of the mind.
Interesting. Bicycles. I'm trying to parse that. What did Steve Jobs mean by that?
It was in the context of like humans are not that fast as in terms of walking in the animal kingdom. Like cheetahs are way faster. However, a human on a bicycle can outrun any animal, right? And in that context, he presented computers as bicycles for the mind.
Oh man, I can really relate to that. I feel like I can't even if I don't my phone is like this external hard drive for my mind, and if I don't make a note of it, I'm just going to forget about it. It's like this extension to myself now. Okay. Thank you for humoring us with that, Remco. I'm not surprised that you have a very cool bicycle. That sounds great. Maybe we'll get a chance to ride bikes together sometime. So Remco, for the folks here and for me as well, I know you've been in this space for a while, but can you tell us about how you got started in crypto and in Ethereum?
Yeah, totally. You know what? Let's go way back when, because I've been in I would argue I've been into crypto since way before the Bitcoin white paper. I always was interested in the power of tools and how they can empower people, and specifically in math and what they can do, which got me into cryptography. And then in high school, like the whole Napster thing happened, and I suddenly saw that a piece of software, essentially just bits and bytes, code written by a bunch of people in their bedrooms, for all I know, can make an impact and is a force in this world that is unimaginably strong. Like the peer-to-peer file sharing scene showed how powerful and unstoppable the decentralized technology can be. So I was always fascinated in that and looking for ways to turn that into a force for good, a way to make society a better place using these strong technologies. So during university, I started a company that was working on decentralized file sharing technology. We took some inspiration from Git, which was relatively new at the time, to hash the history of file changes together. Now, these days, any startup would call that a blockchain, but that was not a thing back then. Let's see, how did I get into blockchain specifically? That was Yeah, through mutual friends, I got invited to spend a week at a squat somewhere in the outskirts of Milan. That was in 2013. And I ended up spending a week there with a bunch of people I didn't know at the time, but they're Amir Taki and Peter Todd and the whole OG Bitcoin gang that at the time was working on dark wallet, like a new kind of wallet specialized for, I would say, almost subversive use cases. Absolutely fascinating to meet people that were so driven by ideals and had such strong principles in what they were trying to realize in the world. But I also left it with a feeling that if they really want to take this mainstream, then this strong anti-establishment narrative is just simply not the way. It just feels too negative to me and also too uncompromising in a way. And then I heard about Ethereum and I saw how it handled the Ethereum and the DAO at the early days, which was an incredible experiment in decentralized governance and like collective decision making. And then the DAO hack happened, of course. And the way the community got together and made a decision that compromised on some of the initial dogmas that they took, that to me was an extremely promising signal that this is a community that is more interested in building something that makes a positive change in the world and that lasts than trying to force through their principles even in places where it obviously does not make sense. And of course you would never do such a thing and make such a decision again, but at the time I thought it was a sign of maturity within the ecosystem that they were able to do that. So basically from that moment on I got pretty excited about Ethereum. And the other thing is that Bitcoin at the time was moving away. It started with a VM that had quite a rich instruction set, but then as they found issues and bugs in it, because it is really hard to get these consensus algorithms right, they started locking it down. So all the smart contract functionality, or at least the initial directions towards it, got removed, and Ethereum instead took this as a core principle, and that allowed it to grow into something that is much more than just a currency. So then I would say co-founded or like joined really on a company that was going to bring private equity investment to the blockchain. This excited me because at the time, like one of the sources of like global inequality I saw is that it takes longer and longer for companies to do a public listing. Like it used to be that at a relatively modest valuation, companies would go to the stock exchange and the general public can vet them and join in and benefit from their growth as co-investors. That changed, and now companies basically stay in the hands of private equity investors for very, very long times. And most which means that the majority of the growth and realization of potential of the company is captured by a relatively small group of people that have access to private equity. So yeah, we set out to. Yeah.
They do that under the guise of consumer protection, right? Like the requirements. I think what you're referring to is an accredited investor, but that doesn't always turn out to be the case.
Yes, and I can also tell you that plenty of the people who meet the criteria for accredited investor are really not much better investors than ones that don't meet that bar. So I'm not sure how well of a selection criteria that is in the first place. But anyway, we started this company to try and disrupt that, make this blockchain based, smart contract based. This was back in 2016, around the time of DEFCON 2, I think. But or at least I realized that one of the issues is that if you're a startup founder, you already have a lot of risk and challenges on your plate. And there is no shortage of private equity funding. So why would you take funding from this weird untested vehicle if you can just get plenty of non-risk funding? So naturally, it was very hard to find companies that were actually interested in taking funding through a decentralized means like that, because you want to de-risk your, like, you want to focus on your mission and not introduce any unnecessary risks. So I left that to join 0x Project pretty early on. I did audit their V1 contract and got in touch with Amir and Will that way, and they invited me to join the company right after the ICO. I worked on the smart contract for V2 and then ended up getting sucked into the research problem of scaling blockchains, because that obviously became the bottleneck to worldwide adoption. So did quite a bit of research into how can you build a DEX as a layer 2 exchange, ZK based. Got really deep into Starks as a solution there, which was fascinating. And then we got the most recent boom, which was all NFTs and yield farming. And I just got so disgusted by the way that every new project just tried to capitalize on the existing markets and try to make the people that are already there, give them like better means to get even richer. And none of these projects actually seemed to draw in any new users, probably with the exception of NFTs. NFTs genuinely pulled in a lot of new users with a new use case. But the yield farming stuff, it just left a bad taste in my mouth. And I was looking to leave the blockchain space altogether at that point. Also wanted to diversify more, get a little bit back to my roots of also doing a little bit of electronics and hardware engineering. And then someone introduced me to Worldcoin, which had this amazing vision of we want to create a token that is fairly distributed across the whole world, thinks about universal basic income, thinks about making a cryptocurrency that actually reaches a global audience. That actually, it just reminded me of all the good stuff that I missed from the early days of blockchain. It's about actually making a meaningful impact in the world. And I got to meet the team, and they are just all so incredibly talented engineers, and also in a wide spectrum of fields, from like machine learning to hardware engineering to logistics, economics, you name it, everything, which also fed my appetite to generalize a little bit more and pull myself out of this blockchain bubble a little bit. So yeah, at that point, WorldCoin was in it, like I first saw it through a white paper that I got sent that was basically 40 pages of detailed drawings of how to build an orb and use biometrics to create a concept of a unique human. And then a very short section on how to actually create a currency on top of that using blockchain technology, which I found very fascinating because, like, to me, the hardware seems by far the hardest problem here. Like, blockchains to me seem relatively straightforward. I know them well. And hardware, from what I've heard, or also from other people attempting it, it is just so incredibly hard to do hardware manufacturing and design well. And they seem to have all of that already solved by then, which was incredible. So yeah, I joined them to help them out with the remaining bit, which is the easy part of building a blockchain and a protocol on top of that. We were also already super aligned on what that needed to look like in terms of, like, it needs to be absolutely maximally privacy preserving. And one of the things we discovered together early on is that, you know what, we're solving this Sybil protection problem, the Sybil resistance problem. So we can do our token airdrop. So we can do the first token airdrop that drops it on every single human on the planet. But we discovered, working on the blockchain side quite early on, that, hey, this is actually a really useful primitive for the blockchain ecosystem in general. Like, it's one of those things where you have a startup and you have this big goal in the horizon that you're working towards, and then you find the speed bump that you didn't really know was there in the beginning, and you work really hard to solve it, and then it turns out that the speed bump is actually the product you were looking to build in the first place. And a bit of that happened. So we ended up building World ID, which takes what we've built in terms of unique humanness as a product that then other people can use. And I think that sharing this with a wider community is also way, way, way more powerful, because going back to, like, the very original, what triggered it all is the realization that, like, global inequality is a problem that we really need to start taking serious, because it's only going to get worse as technology advances. And we need some form of universal basic income to do that. We cannot rely on governments to implement such a thing. You need to do it on a global scale. But one of the issues with that is that it's a so-called wicked problem. It is a very hard problem of which you can't even define what the boundary conditions of the problem are. You won't know what the solution is until you're actually there and you've actually solved it. So the best we can do there is, like, it would be foolish to think that we will be able to solve that just by engineering it and then throwing it into the world and assuming we got everything right. What we instead need to do is create the conditions for people to experiment and iterate. Much like how in DeFi, the existence of blockchains and smart contracts created the conditions for some people in their garage to start toying around with the idea of automated market makers, for example, and then just deploying some contracts and seeing how it goes. And of course, we all know how it goes. It became a very big success. But this garage innovation factor where people with a good idea have absolutely no hurdles in taking that idea and bringing it to life. That is very powerful. And we need something similar when it comes to global inequality. We need to have the right tools, basically, for anyone to pick up and build something that can address these problems. And we need experimentation here until we figured out what are the proper solutions.
What an incredible and interesting story you have. And I just want to emphasize and underline sort of the through line here, which is that you've always been in this space and interested in this space for the same reason, which is financial sovereignty, if I'm understanding you correctly. And you've been here so long, I think you definitely qualify as an OG. I would even, I don't know if you identify with the term cypherpunk, but I might describe you with that term. And I just love that. I can just tell you're here for the right reasons. And I think all of us maybe have been a little disillusioned with some of the smoke and mirrors of the last couple of years. But I love this, that you returned to the core mission and the core values and are continuing to work on that at Worldcoin. So what an interesting story.
It will, in the process, launch World ID, which is a proof of personhood solution that is for everyone to use and build protocols on top of, which basically introduces the concept of a human being in the digital domain. Like right now, we don't have a concept of what a human is in the realm of blockchains or in the digital domain, which is sorely needed because it prevents lots of useful things from being built. Like, for example, one person, one vote, or it prevents other people from doing airdrops like that, like we do. You kind of see this rat race on airdrops right now where people try to come up with more and more clever mechanisms to do an airdrop over their user base. And people find more and more clever ways to game the system. And to me, like the end game of that is that we just have airdrops directly to digitally verified humans.
Yeah, this seems to be, we talked about this with the Ethereum attestation service last week. It's almost like an arms race against bots and AI to, try and figure out ways to prove somebody's an actual human being. Remco, so I want to, you told us what Worldcoin is and World ID. I would actually like to take this time to address some of the common misconceptions about Worldcoin, because I think there are a lot of them, and I'd love to hear your take on it. So I think probably the biggest one that we're familiar with is this retinal scan is stored in a database somewhere, and people are rightfully concerned about that for privacy reasons. So could you just address that?
There's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the basics. Retinas and irises are different things. Irises is the visible part around the pupil. Retina is the thing that actually senses light in the back of your eye. We're looking at the iris, and the way it works is the orb takes a picture of it. In the hardware itself, it immediately gets compressed into what we call an iris code, which is a small piece of data that then gets combined with a public key that you show the orb from your wallet, and that gets sent to the backend, which makes sure that this particular iris code hasn't been seen again. The actual images and the raw data, unless you specifically opt into it, it never leaves the device itself. So that is the first layer of privacy protection that is there. Then the second layer is that as soon as we do verify that this is a iris that we haven't seen before, the public key, and only the public key, iris at this point is no longer involved. The public key gets sent to a smart contract on an EVM blockchain that maintains a Merkle tree of all these public keys. So these public keys are completely unrelated to the biometric. They're just literally private public keys like you generate in any wallet. They use slightly different cryptography. It's not easy DSA, but something different that's more friendly for zero knowledge proofs. And we want that because when you actually use it, you get the third layer of privacy protection, which is that you create a zero knowledge proof that you know the private key to a public key that is in this Merkle tree without actually revealing where or what in this Merkle tree it is. And it is this, and this is using Merkle trees and nullifiers, which is a kind of a nice tangentially story here. I'm not sure if I want. Yeah, maybe let's go into it. Why not? So, brief history of privacy in cryptography. There's a couple of approaches, but the approach that everyone takes right now started with I think the zero cache paper, where you have some sort of aggregator like a Merkle tree, all the public keys are in there, and you produce something called a nullifier to make a claim that you remember from the set and you haven't made this claim before. That was done a long time ago already, and then all the future papers of like written on private transactions, all they do is create better and better ways to transfer different kinds of values, different kinds of tokens, have balances, and all of that. That is improved in. But the core principle of how to do privacy and nullifiers actually remained pretty much unchanged for the past almost 10 years now. And it wasn't until the privacy and scaling group at Ethereum Foundation built Semaphore that they decided, like, you know what? Let's just remove all of this transferring balances stuff. Let's just take privacy as a core primitive on its own and release that as a smart contract and library. That's a project called Semaphore, and that's what we ended up using. So it's actually like very well understood and at this point pretty old technology. It's still conceptually a little bit hard because the nullifiers are kind of weird things. It's sort of a random number that gets generated when you do this proof, and if you ever try to claim something twice, it will produce the same random number again. So you can see that, hey, we already saw this number, so someone must have been trying to scam the system and do it twice. But if you're an honest player, all that gets shown in the proof is a random number, which is different from the random number that you may have used to do a different claim. So there's literally no correlation. And I think that's for us is very powerful because it makes it such that our proof of personhood is maximally anonymous. If you use the proof of personhood to claim our airdrop, claim someone else's airdrop, participate in a vote on a different proposal within the same project, all those actions, you are only guaranteed that they were all done by someone who signed up to the system, so a verified, unique human being, but you wouldn't even be able to tell that those were done by the same human being, let alone who this human being is. So that's the third and sort of final maximal level of privacy protection that we have in this system.
Thank you for walking us through that, Remco. I want to pivot now. I want to shift gears into the decision to bring World App and World ID to Optimism. Can you kind of walk us through the thinking there, Remco, of, okay, so you guys are building this global decentralized identity layer, started on the Ethereum mainnet. Why the move to L2 and specifically why the move to Optimism?
Sure. So obviously from the start, we had the goal of creating a system that can target the entire world population. So we're talking about at least 1 billion users. That's the number we have in our mind. And then it becomes immediately clear that none of the existing blockchain solutions, the L1s at least, are anywhere near sufficient for that. So we started looking into what does the scaling landscape look like? What are the safe bets? Initially, we went for another project from the privacy and scaling group at the Ethereum Foundation, Hubble, which is a funny L2. It combines optimistic settlement. So you have very cheap verification costs that way with a thing called BLS signature aggregation, which achieves most of the savings that you could do with zero knowledge proofs without being as complicated. And it does some other things like basic compression of transactions. So we played around with that system because we knew it was capable of achieving transaction fees that were lower than anything else that was out there. We wrote a high performance node for that in Go. We even ended up running it for a while with our beta users we had at the time. I think we achieved transaction costs as low as 350 gas per transaction on L1, which was pretty amazing. But we also realized the limitations of that solution. It is not EVM compatible, so you'd be missing out on all of the ecosystem that you would have on an EVM compatible chain. And like I said, I find it really important that we have this ability for everyone to innovate and build upon it. So we really need to be on an EVM compatible chain and hook into an existing ecosystem and tooling and existing developer base to have this rich ecosystem and all the people that we need to address the problems that we want to address. So we decided to not continue the line on Hubble. Part of the motivation is that a lot of progress was being made in L2s. CK EVMs became a thing. Optimistic EVM compatible rollups became production grade. So timelines there shortened, which made it such that, okay, maybe we can safely bet on EVM chains becoming a thing. Then, of course, we looked at what are our options there. We had some requirements. We needed a hard tie to Ethereum L1 for security reasons. If you're talking about 1 billion people's wallets, you want them to be very secure. And then what we liked in particular about Optimism is, well, a couple of things, really. First of all, technological, how do you call it? Like how advanced the technology is for the L2 is only a factor in the success of an L2. Being able to build an ecosystem and a community around it is also very, very important for a project to take off and become sustainable. And I think their optimism is very strong. Like everyone, the technology is sort of a common denominator. Everyone is roughly at the same level. There's a lot of sharing there. So no one is really getting ahead too far. It's not going to be the discriminator. The discriminator, I think, is going to be the ecosystem that you're able to build around it. And their optimism always was very strong. But with the superchain vision, I think they just kicked it in a whole nother gear where we're realizing that, hey, this L2 technology is almost a commodity, and we should instead focus on how do we create a community and as much shared common good within this as we can. But I am explaining you the superchain. I think you know it better than I do.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this reminds me of something that Carl, who's a co-founder and now CEO of OP Labs, always says, or he has said, which has always stuck with me, which is that just like you said, these chains are going to be commoditized and the real differentiator is going to be culture, which I've always found fascinating. Maybe a little biased there because my skill set leans more on the cultural side than the technological side. But I always find that to be a really interesting point, and you seem to be confirming that.
Yeah, that was a big driver. Also, we don't know yet what exactly we need out of an L2. So the ability to take OP stack and experiment and modify it to our needs is very valuable to us.
Yes. It being fully open source and MIT licensed, that is always an option. So yeah, we love this collaboration. Same like EAS last week, just more partners helping us build this super chain vision together. And people like yourself, Remco, who definitely have a lot of expertise and a lot of value to add. So very exciting. I want to shift gears again. Zane is on the space with us today, and he gave a great overview of identity, decentralized identity on Optimism mainnet. Zane, I wonder if you could kind of just give the same spiel you did last week, and maybe if there's what the connection there is with Worldcoin and what this Worldcoin building on the OP stack means for Optimism mainnet.
Yeah, absolutely. Howdy, y'all. Excited for Worldcoin to be coming to OP and the super chain. So why do we care about decentralized identity and what does it all mean? It actually kind of goes back to what Mac just talked about around like the culture of the Optimism Collective, and probably a large part in like why each of you are in this space today, right? So the Optimism Collective is focused on scaling Ethereum and ushering in a new economic system and one that fuels positive sum games. So what does that mean? Like if you saw, I think it was over the last month, we just wrapped up retroactive public goods round 2, where over 10 million OP was distributed to 195 ecosystems or ecosystem projects, building on Ethereum. And the entire goal of that, right, is to solve for something called impact equals profit. Now, the idea there is that your contributions to your community and to your ecosystem should be rewarded with profit, or could be token, could be any form. And Optimism is focused on redistributing all of the sequencer funds via retroactive public goods funding as a way to grow the ecosystem and achieve that vision. Now, decentralized identity is core to that mission, right? And the rationale there is like, how do we even figure out who gets, what was someone's impact or what was someone's profit? And the amazing thing about this primitive of decentralized identity is not only can it unlock things like democratic governance and quadratic voting, but it also touches exactly on what Remco was talking about in the beginning of this space. It empowers individuals to have greater control of their finances and participate in a global economy on their own terms. So that's a little bit around like why builders in the Optimism Collective are so excited for decentralized identity and what it can bring. So last week we shared that the attestation station, or you can imagine this as like a multiplayer database that allows you to store, non-transactional data about specific addresses. Now we announced that product was upgrading to the EAS standard, or Ethereum Attestation Service. And in that announcement we shared, as we're building decentralized identity in the Optimism ecosystem, we're not doing it as a one-off entity, as OP Labs or as OP Foundation. We're doing this with other collaborators in the ecosystem, like EAS, like OtterSpace, like Click, like Gitcoin, to come up with something that empowers each individual to own their identity in the way that they want to. So in a similar approach, right, with what Worldcoin is doing, we are so excited to get to collaborate and to come up with something that allows builders to use the available data on chain as well as off chain to come up with novel solutions that are using decentralized identity. And we can't share too much alpha, but we have some upcoming products that are going to be a 20x better experience than existing solutions when you use decentralized identity. And we're really excited longer term for the Optimism Citizen House governance to start using this same amount of variety of identity data, whether it's Worldcoin data or attestation data in the attestation station, to really empower the ecosystem and allow for net new innovations to show up.
Thank you for that, Zane. Yeah, I just want to re-emphasize here. I'm just so excited that, with Base, the team at Coinbase joining us as contributors at the Optimism Collective, and now Worldcoin, I'm just incredibly optimistic with the amount of intellectual firepower being aimed at some of these problems. I think that's the most exciting aspect of this all, is just bringing people like Remco and the whole team at Worldcoin on to help us solve some of these problems.
Yeah, 100%. Like, one of my favorite things is, we have this attestation station collaborators channel. Maybe we should rename it the Decentralized Identity Collaborators channel, for people that are, iterating on identity and reputation on the superchain. And it's got like over 10 distinct teams and I think over 120 contributors now on there. So if you're interested, in using Worldcoin or other types of, reputation type data, definitely check out our most recent blog post. At the bottom of it, there's a link to our Telegram collaborators channel, and we'd love to, kick the tires together.
Yeah, and that blog post can be found at blog.oplabs.co. I think we're getting kind of close to winding this down, guys. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, Remco, before we close this thing out?
Yeah, sure. I can be a little bit forward-looking. So one of the things we're looking at right now is we have in our wallet the proof of personhood check, but we have many more aspects to our identity. So we're looking a lot at how can we empower users to handle more complex identities. And one of the things that I think is going to be really important there is that we have very strong user agents, essentially, like pieces of software that act on the user's behalf, and they need to take privacy very serious. So we're researching right now how we can do very large zero knowledge proofs on mobile devices.
This sounds like something that might usher in that next billion users.
Yes.
Awesome. And for people listening and you want to follow along with this, you want to maybe do some research after the show, I'd encourage you to follow Worldcoin on Twitter. Also check out the announcement blog post that they put out about this collaboration with Optimism. That can be found at worldcoin.org/blog. With that, unless my guests have anything else to add, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today on OP Radio. Thank my guests. Remco, you did not disappoint. You sound like a very interesting individual, and I hope someday we get to ride bikes together.
Looking forward to it. Anytime.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the internet. Stay optimistic, y'all.